webinar. But welcome everybody. Today marks the first day of Native Plant Month in Arkansas for 2021. The governor did proclaim May of 2021 as Arkansas Native Plant Month. This is also the first day of our virtual spring meeting. We have a lot of fun activities and events planned throughout the month to promote and help raise awareness of the native flora of Arkansas. So thank you all for being here for the first webinar in our free webinar series hosted by the Arkansas Native Plant Society. This webinar is being recorded, and afterwards we will be uploading the recording to our YouTube channel. I also want to encourage everyone to check out our online silent auction at biddingowl.com/ANPS. That is biddingowl.com at ANPS. You'll have a chance to win items such as botany books, Native Plant Society merchandise, native plants donated from Pine Ridge Gardens, as well as signed copies of the recently published Trees, Shrubs, and Woody Vines of Arkansas. This month, we're also hosting the Native Plant Adventure Challenge. This is where you can help raise money for the Native Plant Society by gathering sponsors who will agree to donate to the Native Plant Society for each native plant species that you can identify throughout the month. For more information or to register for the Native Plant Adventure Challenge, you can email me at anps.president@gmail.com. Also, to join the Native Plant Society, you can go to our website at anps.org/join. I want to give a quick mention for the next two webinars that we have coming up in our webinar series. On Saturday, May 8th from 1 to 2 p.m., Karen Willard will be giving a great talk on mosses called Mosses, the Original Tree Huggers. And then Wednesday, May 12th from 2 to 3 p.m., Bo Brown, author of the recently published Foraging the Ozarks, is going to be giving a talk on invasives that are edible. And it's going to be called Here Come the Invasivores, Foraging Invasive Species to Help Our Natives. Our speaker today is Stephen Foster. Stephen Foster has been fascinated with woody plants as herbs for the past 47 years. He was a charter member of the Arkansas Native Plant Society. He arrived in Arkansas in 1979, began his career at the Sabbath Day Lake, Maine Shaker Community's Herb Department, which dates back to 1799. He is the author and photographer of 19 books, including senior author of 3 Peterson Field guides, most recently the 2014 third edition of the Peterson Field Guide to Medicinal Plants and Herbs. He's also author of the National Geographic's A Desk Reference to Nature's Medicine, which is a New York Public Library's best of reference, or they consider that one they're on their best of reference list. Today, Stephen will give a presentation on benevolent trees, native woody plants in the American herbal tradition. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Stephen. And if you have any questions, feel free to submit them in the chat. All right.
Thank you, Eric. It's a pleasure to be here and see some familiar names up on the screen. I love trees, and I love books on trees and information on trees. So we're fortunate in Arkansas to have a number of interesting titles. Here's the 1924 Buchholz and Mattoon's Common Trees of Arkansas. And then, of course, we have the Arkansas Forestry Commission's various editions of Trees of Arkansas. Carl Hunter's 2 books on Trees and Shrubs of Arkansas from, when was that? 1989 or something like that. And Eric Sundell's update of Dwight Moore's Trees of Arkansas from the Arkansas Forestry Commission. And then this year, of course, we have the Mother Lode, Trees, Shrubs, and Woody Vines of Arkansas by Ogle, Witzel, and Gentry. And I'm going to wear out my copy this year, and I'm going to have to buy another one. But that's a great book, and it's helped me unlearn things that I thought I knew about woody plants of Arkansas. But in putting together this presentation and trying to decide what plants to put in it, what woody plants, it was clear that probably most of the plants in the index could actually be
Sorry, Stephen, I accidentally muted you. Let me fix this real quick. I didn't know it was going to mute you. I thought. Okay.
okay.
Okay, we're back. Sorry, I was trying to mute everybody. I didn't think it would mute you too.
Okay, so so in looking at the index of the recent trees, shrubs, and woody vines of Arkansas, it became clear to me that most of the plants in the book are medicinal plants. So I just have a selection of, I don't know, 50 or 60 or 100 herbs we can talk about. But first, in terms of American herbal traditions, we've got to know a little bit about that. And let's see if my PowerPoint is gonna cooperate here. There we go. Okay, so the first thing I want you to know is that all of the books that I'm going to talk about here are books that are available online from at least two different sources, the biodiversitylibrary.org and archive.org. And so as somebody who became interested in old ways of doing things while I was at the Shaker Village at Sabbath Day Lake, Maine, I became interested in older books. And now it's possible to download PDF copies of these books for free from these websites. So they're just incredible resources. So on my computer, I've got a library of about 8,000 antiquarian books that I've simply downloaded. So so great books to know about is things like John Evelyn's A Discourse on Forest Trees, commonly known as Evelyn Silva. This is the 1664 edition, and the last edition was published in 1824. But you can download most of these editions, and by the middle of the 1600s in England, they were losing most of their forest trees, which were being used for fuel and also for military use, building ships and building weapons. So this book was meant to really promote forestry in general in the UK. So it's a classic work in forestry. And this is a fabulous set of books here. Charles Sprague Sargent, Silva of North America, published in 14 volumes from 1890 until 1904 with fabulous illustrations. So this is one of the first places I go to for information because he's got such great bibliographical sources. And then odd books like Catesby's Hortus Europaea Americanus, a collection of 85 curious trees and shrubs of North America. And I was looking at that when I was putting together this presentation and was surprised to learn that when settlers first arrived in the Northeast, for example, that linden, Tilia americana, made up 2/3 of the forest trees in the eastern deciduous forest at that point in time. So in terms of American herbal traditions, there's really 5 or 6 different ways we can look at plants, be they herbaceous plants or trees as medicinal plants. And that's Native American traditions, ethnobotany as a academic discipline did not emerge until 1895. So most of the early uses recorded by European settlers for American Indian uses are found in the travel literature or in works, colonial works like Benjamin Smith Barton's collections for an essay towards the materia medica of the United States. So Benjamin Smith Barton, could be called a mainstream author and physician who helped to develop use of American medicinal plants by the physician class in the US. And then you had the what were called irregular physicians or the Thompsonians. I mean, this is not somebody you'd like to have as your gynecologist probably, but Samuel Thompson published his New Guide to Health. It was first published in 1822 and he died in 1843, but he patented his system of medicine and sold it by subscription for $25 a family, and had between 2 and 3 million adherents to his system of medicine, which was like 10% of the population in the America of the 1820s and 30s. We also have characters like the eclectic Constantine Samuel Rafinesque, and Rafinesque, depending upon your academic discipline, he named a lot of fish species as well as amphibians and some reptiles, and created enormous confusion in botanical taxonomy in the early 19th century, but was also a very prolific author. And one of his books was a manual or medical botany of the US, published in 2 volumes in 1828 and 1830. And this is always a starting point for discovery about uses of American medicinal plants. And then we have books like, this is George B. Emerson's Trees and Shrubs of Massachusetts, first published in 1846, and it went through 4 or 5 editions, but it has great information on material use of trees and shrubs, as well as medicinal use. And for this part of the country, Francis Porcher's Resources of Southern Fields and Forests, which was intended as a medical botany of the Confederate States, published in 1863, but Porcher was a graduate of the South Carolina Medical College, and did his thesis on medicinal plants of South Carolina that was published in 1848. So before the Confederacy, he was an expert on medicinal plants in the Southeast, as well as a practicing physician. So this is an extremely valuable practical book. A second edition was published in 1869. There's a photograph of Porcher. And then we have a group that emerged after 1850 that were known as eclectic physicians. And they were medical doctors who primarily relied upon American medicinal plants in their materia medica. And John Uri Lode was their primary pharmacist, manufacturing pharmacist, who made preparations of various medicinal plants and introduced the first echinacea preparations, the first black cohosh, was instrumental in saw palmetto entering the market. So Lloyd is a very important figure in the history of American medicinal plants. And he and his brothers created a library in Cincinnati, the Lloyd Library and Museum, which is the largest medicinal plant library in the world, even today. And finally, you have regular physicians or allopathic medicine and the use of American medicinal plants as a part of pharmacy. And so the United States Pharmacopoeia, if you see you go into a pharmacy and you see the letters USP on a over-the-counter drug or other ingredient, the USP defines drugs in the US, and last year celebrated its 200th anniversary. So that's a picture of the 1820 US Pharmacopoeia there. And actually I use the 2000 United States Pharmacopoeia as a monitor stand here on my desk. So these are some of the traditions where we garner information on medicinal plants of various sorts. When I was in Maine from 1974 to 1978, working at the Sabbath Day Lake, Maine Shaker community, I got to learn about all of these different herbal traditions, and the Shakers produced medicinal plant products for all of these different user groups in the 19th century into the 20th century. So that is me in 1977. And 3 years later, I was in Arkansas as a charter member of the Arkansas Native Plant Society. So I intended to stay here for about a year, and 41 years later, I haven't left. So let's talk about some specific plants. Box elder, Acer Nagundo, we tend to think of as a weedy kind of tree, but like other maples, it was used to make maple sugar or crystallized sugar from the sap. The twigs are easily hollowed out so that they were used as pipe stems or tubes, and the inner bark was used as an emetic, something that would induce vomiting, which was a popular mode of cleansing in the springtime in 19th century America, no matter what medical system you followed. And the bark of the tree was also used as a ceremonial incense. So on the left, you see the staminate flowers, and then the samaras on the right. This is Acer rubrum, red maple, and The inner bark was used as a treatment for measles, and also a wash of the cooled bark was used for sore eyes, and red maple was also tapped like sugar maple and other maples for sap. This is silver maple, Acer Saccharinum, which we kind of think of as a bit of a weed tree. These are the male flowers here. And then on the same tree, the separate female flowers. And this was introduced into English horticulture around 1725. It's a fast growing tree. It kind of has punky wood, so you don't want to have it next to your house. The fruits were used in decoctions for the treatment of diarrhea and dysentery. And there are a leaf of the silver maple. Buckeye, Aesculus globra, Ohio Buckeye. The seed, the fruit was put in one's pocket to ward off disease, and the seeds mixed with flour were put in water as a fish poison to basically stun fish in a confined area and make them float up to the surface. So that was a common use of buckeyes and several other slightly toxic plants. Ohio Buckeye is blooming now with its beautiful flowers. And I love it when those leaves unfurl earlier in the spring. Aeschylus, Pavia, red buckeyes, the nuts were also used as a talisman, carried in the pocket to ward off rheumatism, hemorrhoids, and for good luck. But when I think of the genus Aesculus as a medicinal plant, really the thing I think of is the European horse chestnut. And there's a product available in much of the world market, not available as a drug in the US. It's an extract of horse chestnut seeds called essene, which is put in a gel, and it's an over-the-counter product in much of Europe for the treatment of any kind of bruising and sprains. So like a German soccer team is going to have a tube of the horse chestnut gel in their first aid kit. It's amazing how well it works on bruising. And then an infusion form is used in trauma centers for the treatment of brain injuries. So it's a fascinating plant. A little plug for Beau Brown's forthcoming Arkansas native plant invasive alien lecture. You know, I've often thought that one way of dealing with non-native plants is to find a way to use them. So this is our common mimosa tree, which was introduced to Western horticulture in basically in the mid-19th century. But the flower and the bark are both used as drugs in traditional Chinese medicine. And they're used basically, you could call an antidepressant. The name He Huan means to enliven the spirit. So, you know, if you went to Beijing, any traditional drugstore would have mimosa flowers and or mimosa bark, which is an official drug in the modern Chinese pharmacopoeia for the treatment of anxiety, depression, and insomnia. So So this plant isn't so bad. Amelanchier arborea serviceberry. There's been so much research done on native fruits in Eastern North America and elsewhere, looking at the antioxidant activity of the fruits that are contain anthocyanins. Serviceberry is one of those that has been looked at fairly closely, although I've never been able to get enough serviceberries to do anything with. Aurelia spinosa, devil's walking stick, also called Hercules club, and Angelica tree is the largest North American member of the ginseng family. It occurs in forests in much of Eastern North America, and African Americans in the South used it as a primary snake bite remedy. They used the bark of the tree, and a tincture of the berries was used for rheumatism and colic. And it's a good example of cross-cultural uses too, because the genus Aurelia in the ginseng family is also has Eastern Asiatic members. So an Asian counterpart is Aurelia alata, which occurs in Northeast Asia. And Korean immigrants in the Washington, D.C. area have harvested Aurelia spinosa and used it as a substitute for the Eastern Asiatic Aurelia alata for the treatment of diabetes. So that's just one example of cross-cultural uses of medicinal plants. And there's a pattern of plant disjunctions in Eastern Asia and Eastern North America. So there's quite a number of plants with comparative uses between the two continents and different cultures, sometimes often the same use. So here's the spiny trunk of Aurelia spinosa. I remember the first year I was in Arkansas, bounding down a hillside, grabbing trees as I came down the hillside, and grabbed onto one of these and was sorry that I did. This is pawpaw, and you know, it's such a tropical looking sort of thing. And you know, this is a temperate climate outlier from this tropical plant group in the pawpaw family. And basically, the fruits are edible, but all other parts of the plant are considered potentially toxic. The leaves have kind of a noxious, almost peanut butter-like smell. The seeds are considered narcotic, that is, they will produce stupor. And the leaves can also cause contact dermatitis, and the flowers are just a marvelous thing to see in the spring before the leaves come out. And then if you can get to the pawpaws before the squirrels do, you're in for a good taste treat. So we have Ozark chinkapin, which I was glad to see is now called Castinia ozarkensis again, instead of a variety of Castinia pumila. But you know, we had giant Ozark chestnut trees up until the 1950s, when the chestnut blight came into Arkansas. And so, you know, most of the trees we have now are just sprouting from the base. There's a program at Hobbs State Park that is selecting and growing out Ozark chinkapins that are resistant to the blight. So here's what we could have had. This is Castinia sativa, the European chestnut, which is really a fascinating tree. This individual was at Blarney Castle in Ireland. And I've been to Blarney Castle twice, but I've never been inside Blarney Castle because the trees planted outside on the estate are so fascinating. Who has time to go kiss the Blarney Stone? But the European horse chestnut is really from Asia Minor and was introduced into Greece about 2,500 years ago. And by Roman times, there were at least 8 cultivars. So in the UK, it's often called Spanish chestnut because 500 years ago, a particularly sweet fruited variety was imported from Spain to Northern Europe and England and grown out. Here's a tree of Castinia sativa in the Balkans. This is in Montenegro near the Albania border. And chestnut leaves used to be used for coughs and sore throat, and it's actually an official traditional medicine in Europe. In Europe, herbal products, rather than being sold as dietary supplements, as they are in the US, are actually sold in a special regulatory category in the EU called traditional medicines. So European chestnut leaf falls into that category of traditional medicines. Catalpa, we have Catalpa speciosa and Catalpa bignonioides. And, you know, this is one plant that I go to key out when it's in flower and look at the keys and just scratch my head to try and figure out exactly what I'm looking at. So I'm assuming most of what I'm seeing around Eureka Springs is Catalpa speciosa. Catalpa worms, which is the larvae of the Catalpa sphinx, is a favorite fishing bait in the South. Here we have buttonbush, Cephalanthus occidentalis. The bark was used as a diuretic, tonic, a bitter astringent, and as a treatment for malaria, as a bitter astringent. It's a member of the Rubiaceae, the same family as Cinchona, which is the primary treatment for malaria historically and the source of quinine. So it's interesting that not a lot of chemical work has ever been done on buttonbush, but it would be interesting to see what the chemistry is. Red bud, Cercis canadensis, and if you've started to see a pattern here, you'll see that I've set this up simply alphabetically by scientific name. So red bud flowers are delicious. The bark is highly astringent and used to be used for the treatment of diarrhea and dysentery. Never much used though. Chiananthus virginicus fringe tree in the Ozarks is called Granddaddy Graybeard. And at the turn of the 19th and 20th centuries, preparations of fringe tree bark We're actually the second best-selling American medicinal plant in the United States and used for the treatment of various liver conditions. So this is the Lode brothers fluid extract of Chiananthus bark. And this is an item that has simply and probably rightly disappeared from the medicinal plant trade. And this is a relatively rare member of the pea family, Cladastris kentuckea, or yellowwood, American yellowwood. Other historical names included yellow ash, or fustic tree, or yellow locust. The bark was once used for making canoes. The bright yellow bark and the roots was claimed by Rafinesque to be purgative, and the wood was once used to make a yellow dye. And it was first discovered in 1796 by Andre Michaud, collecting near the Cumberland River in the Carolinas. Oops, there we go. Dogwood, we of course appreciate for its beauty, but Cornus florida was also a very important medicinal plant in colonial America. The bark was the primary substitute used for cinchona bark for the treatment of malaria. So it would have been found in pharmacies up until about 1850. There's been recent work, chemical and pharmacological work done on the bark that show that it does have some antiplasmodial activity against chloroquine resistant malaria. And of course, dogwood is affected by the dogwood anthracnose, and so many of our native plants, native woody plants, are affected or infected by diseases of various sorts. A couple of falls ago, I went to Appalachia in southeastern Ohio, and most of their ash trees have died. And so with my herbal and botany buddy friends up there, we just avoided any trails where there were ash trees because the dead ash trees were so dangerous. So routinely the local news in southeastern Ohio has stories of people just driving down the highway and being killed because a dead ash tree drops on them. These are the fruits of dogwood, and dogwood fruits in alcohol were used as a bitter digestive tonic. If you've ever been tempted to eat a dogwood fruit, you know that they don't taste very good. They're very bitter. And the twigs were also used as a primary chewing stick, basically to brush your teeth. So if you chew on the end of a twig that's maybe a quarter inch in diameter, it has a very hard wood, and so you chew on the end of it and it makes a toothbrush. You have to chew it for several hours before it gets to that toothbrush phase, but it really works well. American hazelnut is one of our earliest spring bloomers. Usually we see it at the end of February here in Northwest Arkansas. And you have the long tassel-like staminate flowers. And then at the end of the buds, the tiny but beautiful female flowers that you really have to be looking for to see them, otherwise you might miss them. And the fruits are covered with a leafy envelope. So oftentimes the squirrels will get the American hazelnut fruits before we pay attention to the fact that they're there. Persimmons, unripe persimmons, of course, are known for their astringency. And this was a member of the Eboniaceae, the ebony family. So the wood is very dark and it's very hard. And the inner bark is also highly astringent and was one of those, one of many tree barks used for the treatment of diarrhea, dysentery, to stop bleeding, for hemorrhoids and other conditions. Historically, the fruits were also used for making beer and wine, among other things. This is leatherwood, and in Eureka Springs, we have a probably the world's greatest concentration of Ozark Leatherwood, Durca decipiens, which was a new species described by Aaron Floden and colleagues in 2009. And so quite a number of populations of Ozark Leatherwood have been found in at Lake Leatherwood City Park in Eureka Springs, also populations in Washington County, and I think Izard County. So it's a globally rare species that is quite interesting. Like Durca palaustris, one of the other 4 North American species, in this outlayer of Thymelaceae, which is mainly a tropical plant group and mainly associated with poisonous plants. But Durca, the 4 Durca species have very little lignin in the wood. And so that makes them very flexible, hence the name leatherwood, because they're kind of flexible like leather, or flexible like lead. So the French name means flexible lead. And the leaves were used as a cathartic, as well as to bring out blisters on the skin. So this is really more indicative of toxicity than medicinal utility per se. So here's the Durca decipiens, the Ozark Leatherwood flower, and they're technically difficult to distinguish between one another, the Durca decipiens and the Durca palaustris. So I won't go into those details here. You can save those for the last session and ask Theo, how do you tell the two apart? Euonymus americanus, the bark was used for urinary difficulties, also gastrointestinal problems. And one of the many tree barks, it's really a shrub that was used for the treatment of malaria. Here we have American beech, which occurs in a few parts of Arkansas. I think of it in Newton County and Madison County, and it kind of jumps over the northwest portion of Arkansas, but it's always easy to identify in the winter because of its marcescent leaves, these dried leaves that hang on all winter long. The wood was used to make creosote, and the fresh leaves were used as a poultice on burns. It was also used as a treatment for poison ivy, and the Cherokee used the inner bark as a treatment for intestinal worms. But you know, it's one of our most magnificent eastern deciduous forest trees, and it too is affected by a blight. Honey locust, Gleditsia triacanthos, and this is named in honor of a German botanist, Johann Gleditsch, who died in 1786. He was author of several books on forestry. There are 16 species in the genus Gleditsia, and ours is called honey locust, not because of the flowers, but because of the relatively high sugar content in the twisted legume fruits. So these fruits have an interesting evolutionary dispersal mechanism. They're twisted and they're lightweight, so they disperse the seed by blowing in the wind on the ground and moving across the ground. But Gleditsia sinensis, a Chinese species, is used in traditional Chinese medicine. And the bark is used for treating sore throat and coughs. And actually, the spines are also a drug in traditional Chinese medicine. I forget what it's used for, but there's a whole body of chemical and pharmacological literature on the use of the spines of Gleditsia sinensis. This is one of the most important American medicinal woody plants, witch hazel, Mammalus virginiana. This is common witch hazel that occurs throughout Eastern North America. This is a shrub. This picture was actually taken in Maine. And here are the fruits, a split fruit from the previous year, and then the current year's fruits developing there. And it too has an interesting seed dispersal mechanism. So those seed capsules are spring loaded. So when they dry to a certain point, it will project the seed 10 or 20 feet away from the plant. And the first year I was in the Ozarks, I got a sprig of witch hazel that I brought in the house around Thanksgiving time when it was blooming, and it had some fruits on it from the previous year. And after a day or so, those started exploding around the room. And witch hazel has beautiful flowers with strap-like yellow petals. This photograph was taken at Black Bass Lake City Park in Eureka Springs. And the background is actually the leaf of a dogwood. And it just made such an attractive background. I go and photograph the same witch hazel every year, and the same dogwood is there with colors. So here it is at sunset, here it is at sunrise the next morning with the same leaf in the background. So witch hazel is an astringent. Historically, native groups made a decoction of the bark, and that was rubbed on limbs to make muscles supple and strong for races and games of various sorts. Witch hazel's astringency makes it useful for products for the treatment of hemorrhoids or bleeding. And most of what's on the American market is an aqueous distillate, a water distillate of the branches and the leaves. And most of it comes from Connecticut, where it's grown on managed plots that are coppiced to harvest the bark. In Europe, most of the products are ethanolic extracts, which takes out a different, extracts a different group of chemical components from the bark. But it's such an interesting plant, and it's one of two American medicinal woody plants that's still official in the United States pharmacopoeia. And here in the Ozarks, we have Ozark witch hazel or vernal witch hazel, which also has marcescent leaves. The dried leaves tend to stay on the shrub. And this grows in gravelly stream beds and basically ensures that we have at least one plant in bloom year round. So you can be walking down a creek bed in the Ozarks in the middle of winter and all of a sudden get a strong floral hit, even if it's 5 degrees outside. And it's the flowers of the vernal witch hazel, which have a lovely kind of vanilla cinnamon scent in the dead of winter, whereas Eastern witch hazel, common witch hazel, is basically unscented. One of the easiest ways to identify this is almost all Ozark witch hazel has a red flush, at least at the base of the calyces. There's a close-up of the flower. It's one of our great native plants. And witch hazel preparations have been manufactured in the US since the early 19th century. So that's a shaker label. This is a Lloyd Brothers product. And of course, you can go into any pharmacy in the US and still buy witch hazel products. And in the Ozarks, we also have Hamamelis vernalis form carnea, which is a red form of the vernal witch hazel, which was described by Alfred Reeder. So this was actually a population in Ozark County, Missouri, and the plants were completely red flowered. And it was 5 degrees outside when I took that photograph. Hydrangea arborescens. Hydrangeas beginning to bloom this time of year. And the root was known as gravel root. And there was a paper published in 1851 that suggested using the root of this shrub for the treatment of urinary calculi. So for like kidney stones and things of that sort, and that use has stuck in American herbal traditions. Certainly not an important item. And this is, I think of this as our most important forgotten economic plant in Arkansas. It occurs in southwestern Arkansas, and according to Dr. Shuying Hu, who is a ilex expert at Arnold Arboretum, Ilex vomitoria evolved in the Ouachitas and then radiated out from there. And it was the primary beverage tea of all native groups of the southeastern US, and was traded elsewhere as well, maybe in some semi-cultivated types of situations. One of the most interesting things about it is it's the only North American plant with appreciable levels of caffeine. So like Ilex paraguayensis or yerba mate in southern South America, the Yeopan Holly is a caffeinated plant. Currently, there's about 8 small companies that are making Yeopan tea. And so I guess this would be iced Yeopan tea here. And here are the flowers. So here in Northwest Arkansas, we're kind of right on the edge of its survivability with our minus 20 degrees Fahrenheit temperatures. This winter, I probably lost about half of my Yeopan hollies, but I have 2 variety pendula that made it through the big freeze, although it knocked off all their leaves. So, you know, names have importance. And this is a study that was published in 2014. And basically the lead author, Alicia Wainwright, did a marketing taste test of yerba mate versus Yeopan, and concluded while Yeopan was preferred over yerba mate, the likelihood of purchase of the former declined after participants learned Yeopan's scientific name and about its historical use to induce vomiting. So almost 60% of people who considered purchasing Yeopan were repelled by the scientific name, impeding future promotion of this plant product. So I guess this potential failure in marketing caused Alicia Wainwright, then a botany graduate student, to instead go to Hollywood and become an actress. So if you Google Alicia Wainwright's name now, you won't find much on Ilex vomitoria, but you'll find her as the co-star with Justin Timberlake in the Apple TV, a recent Apple TV Plus movie. Can't remember the name of it. So, so there must be some kind of herbal beverage for memory, but it won't be Ilex vomitoria. So this is a plate from 1591 from a book by Theodore de Brie. And this engraving shows the traditional preparation of Yeopan Holly leaves in the southeastern US as a cleansing decoction. So the poor fellow in the upper right-hand corner there is using the Ilex vomitoria to induce vomiting. But so it was called black tea, and that's how it got the odious name Ilex vomitoria in William Ayton's 1789 Hortus Cuensis. So it's Arkansas's most important neglected economic plant, and something we should look at developing in the future. So with that, our time is up, and I'm gonna turn it back over to Eric, if he's in the room.
Yep, I'm here. Just
Oh, okay,
my
good.
video back on. 1 second. All right. Thank you, Stephen. That was a great presentation. We got a lot of great comments in the comment box. Really appreciate you spending your time here with us this afternoon and sharing with us your wealth of knowledge that you've been accumulating over the years. Let me open the chat here, see what questions have come up. I've recorded a couple already. All right. Well, one first thing is a comment from Jennifer Ogle. She says she's been pronouncing JT. How did you say that last name? Buchholz's name incorrectly all this time, so she appreciated hearing the correct pronunciation.
I'm not sure it was correct or not.
Got a question from Karen White. She was wondering, can our native Buckeyes be used similarly to the horse chestnuts?
Insofar as we know, no. There just hasn't been the chemical work on our native Buckeye species, our native Aesculus species. And that would be an area that would be worth looking into. But these products that are available in Europe are well defined chemically, so it's not something you'd want to use as a folk medicine.
Karen has also wondered, could you eat or could you dry and eat Ozark witch hazel flowers?
I don't know. Maybe she can answer that question for herself in another year.
Maybe Karen, you can get back to us on that. Brian Lockhart, he was wondering, is there a website that lists how to obtain PDF copies of the books you mentioned? I know at the beginning of the presentation you had mentioned was archive.org and then biodiversitylibrary.org, I believe.
Yeah, biodiversitylibrary.org has about 164,000 titles available. And archive.org, not to be confused with archive.com, has about 20 million text items. So usually I know what I'm looking for when I go to search, and I'm searching for a specific author or a plant species. And then I use the Q Medicinal Plant Name Service website to find historic synonyms of botanical names. So oftentimes searching under synonyms, you can find information that's just not going to turn up in the current literature. Another great website is Daniel Moorman's Native Ethnobotany database that is housed right now at BRIT, the Botanical Research Institute of Texas. And that URL is aenb.brit.org. And that is a database basically derived from this book, Native American Ethnobotany by Daniel Moorman, who spent his career as an anthropologist, ethnobotanist at the University of Michigan. So that's kind of the definitive work. And most importantly, the bibliographical key to the literature on Native American ethnobotany. So those are some of the resources I use on a daily basis.
And I believe that book has been split up into 2 volumes, correct? The Native American food plants and Native American medicinal plants.
Yes, they published. This is the mother Lode here from I think it was published in 1999, and then they did a food plant edition and a medicinal plant edition.
And then Suzanne Wright is wondering if you can repeat the URL after the one after you said for archive.org. I'm assuming for the Native American ethnobotany database.
Yeah, aenb.brit.org.
And Sarah Gertz was wondering, for the Ilex vomitoria, how high of a concentration of the tea will cause vomiting versus just using it to drink for caffeine?
Actually, quite a bit. They made it into a really strong decoction called black drink. And that was mixed with other herbs. And this was part of a ceremonial cleansing tradition used by various native groups. So not only were they using the black tea, which was, boiled down to like a quarter its original volume. So it's really highly concentrated. So as part of their cleansing ritual before going into battle or before councils, but on a daily basis, they just drank an infusion of the leaves. So I have Yeopan Holly leaves that I pick from my own plants that I dry, that I use for tea, and also have tea bagged commercial Yeopan Holly leaves. So it makes a great, pleasant tea, high in antioxidants, gives you a nice little caffeine buzz, but not a real stimulating effect like coffee. So, it was the beverage tea of choice among indigenous groups in the Southeast. So if you were a European explorer coming into a Cree village, for example, you'd be preferred a bowl of Yeopan Holly as you came into the village. So yeah, it was widely used.
I believe that's all of the questions we have. Thank you again, Stephen. We've got a lot of just great comments in general. Just people really appreciated your presentation and felt like it was very informative. And I feel the same way. I really appreciate your time and sharing your expertise with us. And I want to thank everyone again for being with us here today. Again, this recording of this webinar will be uploaded to our YouTube channel. Still need to create that channel, but I'll be doing so here very soon now that we have a video to upload to it, since Stephen was our inaugural webinar for what hopefully will become a continuing thing with the Native Plant Society. Again, the next webinar we have is next Saturday, May 8th from 1 to 2 p.m. Karen Willard will be talking about mosses from her presentation, Mosses, the Original Tree Huggers. You can find out more information about the Arkansas Native Plant Society on our website at anps.org. You can check us out on Facebook at facebook.com/Arkansas Native Plant Society. And you're also more than welcome to reach out to me at anps.president@gmail.com. Thanks everyone again for being here, and we'll see you next time. Thank you, Stephen.
Thank you. My pleasure.